Hash the 4:15 Ferry. She left her umbrella on the bench next to me, and that's the only reason I ever spoke to her at all. I didn't notice her leave it. I noticed the rain start 20 minutes later when the ferry was already halfway across the bay. And there it was, a plain black umbrella, still folded, sitting exactly where she'd been sitting. I picked it up without thinking, the way you'd pick up your own keys, and it wasn't until I looked up and scanned the deck that I realized I had no idea who she even was. That's how it started. Not a dramatic first meeting, not eyes locking across a crowded room, just an umbrella and a woman I couldn't find. Let me back up. My name is Webb. I'm 36. I run a small boatyard on the Maine coast, the kind of place that fixes lobster boats and the occasional weekend sailor's leaky hull. I take the 4:15 ferry back from the mainland every Tuesday and Thursday after picking up parts, because the marine supply store doesn't deliver out to the island and never has. 2 years ago, my brother Danny died. He was 29. He went out on a boat that wasn't his in weather he shouldn't have trusted, and he didn't come back. I was the one who found out first, because the Coast Guard called the boatyard before they called our parents, and I had to be the one to drive to their house and tell them their younger son was gone. I'm not going to dwell on that part. This isn't a story about losing him. It's about what happened after on a ferry on a Thursday in the rain. Since Danny died, I don't really talk to people. Not in any deep way. I say what needs saying to customers. I nod at the guys at the dock. I go to my parents' house on Sundays and eat dinner and leave before it gets too quiet. The ferry ride became the one part of my week where nobody expected anything from me. 40 minutes of water and engine noise, and nothing required. She'd been sitting 3 feet away from me for at least 10 minutes before she left. I remember that now, looking back, dark green coat, hood up against a rain that hadn't started yet. A canvas bag with rolled-up paper sticking out the top, like blueprints or drawings. She'd been humming quiet enough that I almost didn't catch it, some tune I didn't recognize. I hadn't looked at her directly. I don't look at people directly anymore. It invites conversation. But I found the umbrella, and I found her, 3 rows up, standing at the rail even though the rain had started in earnest by then, getting soaked, watching the water like it owed her something. "You forgot this," I said, holding it out. She turned, and I want to tell you there was some kind of spark, some cinematic moment, but honestly what I remember is that she looked tired. Not sleepy tired, the other kind, the kind I recognized because I saw it in the mirror every morning. "I didn't forget it," she said. "I left it on purpose. In the rain. I like the rain." She took it anyway, didn't open it. "Thank you for bringing it, though. I should have left it there." That would have been the sensible thing. The thing the version of me from 3 years ago would have done: nod, walk away, go back to my bench, and my 40 minutes of nothing. Instead I said, "You're going to catch pneumonia standing out here." "Maybe I want to." That stopped me. Not because it was dramatic. She said it flatly, almost bored, like she was commenting on the weather, but because I understood exactly what she meant. And I hadn't expected to hear my own thoughts come out of a stranger's mouth on a Thursday ferry. "I'm Marcus," I said, which wasn't an answer to anything, but it was the only thing I had. "Iris." She looked at me a second longer than she needed to. "You look like someone who's also standing in the rain on purpose, Marcus. You're just doing it under a roof." I didn't see her again for 2 weeks. I want to say I looked for her, and I did, in the way you look for someone without admitting you're looking, glancing at the ferry schedule board, taking the earlier crossing once just to see. Telling myself it was a coincidence every time I ended up back at that same bench. But the ferry runs 6 times a day, and the island isn't small, and 2 weeks is a long time to wonder about a woman whose last name you don't even know. Then, a Tuesday. Same ferry, different bench, and there she was again. This time dry, this time with a different bag, this time not humming. She sat down like she'd chosen it on purpose, 2 feet from me, and she didn't say hello. She just said, "You're the umbrella guy. You're the rain girl. That's fair." She almost smiled. "I'm an illustrator. I do work for a publisher up in Rockland, kids' books mostly. I take this ferry when I need to think and the studio's too loud in my head. I fix boats." "I know." "You've got the hands for it." She said this like a fact, not a compliment, and went back to looking at the water. We didn't talk much more that trip. But something had shifted. The silence between us wasn't the kind I usually built around myself, the kind meant to keep people out. It was the kind two people share when neither one needs the other to perform. Over the next month, our crossings started lining up more than chance would explain. I won't pretend I didn't start timing my supply runs around it. She never admitted to doing the same, but she always seemed to know which crossing I'd be on. It was on the fifth or sixth time I'd stopped counting on purpose, because counting felt like admitting something, that she told me why she really rode the ferry when the studio got loud in her head. My husband used to take this route, she said. Before, he worked the mainland side, came home every night on the 4:15. I ride it because it's the last place that still feels like him instead of like the empty parts of the house. I didn't ask what happened to him. I didn't need to. I recognized the shape of that sentence. The careful, worn-smooth way people talk about a loss they've explained 100 times and are tired of explaining. My brother, I said, and that was all I offered, and it was enough. She didn't ask for details either. She just nodded and reached over and for a second put her hand flat against the back of mine on the bench between us. Not holding it, just present, just there. It doesn't get quieter, she said. The house, everyone tells you it will, and it doesn't. You just get better at pretending you don't hear it. Yeah, I said. I know. We sat like that until the ferry docked, her hand against mine, neither of us saying anything else. Both of us understanding that we just told each other the truest thing either of us had said out loud and longer than either of us wanted to admit. I won't tell you it fixed anything. Grief doesn't work like that, and if this story ended with some tidy line about how she healed me, I'd be lying to you, and lying isn't the point of telling it. What I'll tell you is that a year later, Iris and I still take the 4:15 together most Tuesdays and Thursdays, on purpose now instead of by accident. She still keeps her husband's old umbrella, and I never asked her to stop carrying it, and she's never asked me to stop talking about Danny on the Sundays it gets to be too much. We didn't replace what we lost. I don't think that's possible, and I've stopped wanting it to be. What we did was find someone who understood exactly how heavy the quiet gets, and who was willing to sit next to it with me anyway, 40 minutes at a time, all the way across the water. But that's not actually where the story ends. I told you the easy part first, the part that sounds good when you say it out loud at a dinner table. The truth took longer to earn, and it didn't come easy. 3 months after that day with her hand on mine, Iris stopped taking the ferry. No warning, no text saying she needed space. I showed up on a Tuesday and she wasn't there, and I told myself it was a deadline, a busy week, nothing worth worrying about. By the third missed crossing, I stopped telling myself that. I found out from the woman who runs the coffee stand near the terminal. She knew Iris from years of regular orders, that Iris had been in the hospital. Not an emergency, not dramatic. Her body had finally caught up with 2 years of not sleeping, not eating right. Running herself into the ground, the way people do when staying busy, is the only thing standing between them and the quiet. Exhaustion, dehydration, a heart that had been racing for months without her ever mentioning it to anyone. I found her building through the illustration agency's website, and I drove up on a Thursday I should have spent at the boatyard, and I stood outside her door for 10 full minutes before I knocked. Because some part of me was terrified she'd tell me to leave. She didn't. She opened the door in a sweatshirt 3 sizes too big, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. And she looked at me standing there with a bag of the only thing I could think to bring, a thermos of coffee. Because it felt like the least useless thing I owned, and she started crying before either of us said a word. I didn't want you to see me like this, she said. I don't care what I see you like. Everyone who's ever loved someone I lost has left eventually. I didn't want to find out if you would too. I want to tell you I had something wise to say to that. I didn't. I just stepped inside, and I sat with her on a couch surrounded by half-finished drawings of foxes and lighthouses and children who didn't exist yet. And I stayed until she fell asleep against my shoulder, and I stayed after that too. She started riding the ferry again 6 weeks later. Slower at first, she'd get tired halfway through the crossing, and I'd notice her go quiet in a different way than before, a way that scared me a little every time. But she kept coming back. And so did I. It's been 2 years now since the umbrella. Iris moved out to the island last spring, into a little house up the hill from the boatyard, close enough that some mornings I don't even take the ferry. I just walk down and find her already awake. Already drawing, already humming that same tune I never did learn the name of. We still ride the 4-15 together sometimes, not because either of us needs it any more the way we used to, but because it's ours now. It's the place where two people who were both drowning quietly in different houses on different sides of the same water found out neither of them had to keep doing it alone. Danny's still gone. Her husband is still gone. Neither of those things changed, and I've stopped waiting for a version of this story where they do. What changed is that I stopped standing in the rain on purpose. Some Thursdays, that's still enough. I think about telling people the short version of this story sometimes. The umbrella, the rain, the neat ending. Because it's easier than the truth. And because most people want the easy version anyway. But if you've read this far, I think you deserve the parts I usually leave out. There was a stretch, right around the 6-month mark of Iris living on the island, when I almost ruined the whole thing. It wasn't dramatic, it was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse. I got scared. Not of her, of how much I needed her. Of how fast the empty house had turned into a house where someone's shoes were by the door and someone's coffee cup was always in the sink. I'd spent 2 years building a life around not needing anything from anyone, and it turned out that skill doesn't just switch off because you want it to. So I did what people like me do. I pulled back. I started working later at the boatyard, taking on jobs I didn't need to take, telling myself Danny would have wanted me to stay busy. When really I just didn't want to go home and feel the specific kind of terror that comes with being happy after you've spent years being sure you didn't deserve to be. Iris noticed before I did. She always did. "You're doing the thing," she said one night, standing in my kitchen while I pretended to be absorbed in a boat engine part that didn't need cleaning. "What thing?" "The thing where you decide loving someone is dangerous, so you go find something safer to love instead. A boat, a job. Anything that can't leave you because it was never really alive in the first place." I didn't say anything because she was right. And there's nothing to say to someone who's just described the exact shape of your fear better than you ever could yourself. "I'm not Danny," she said, "and you're not my husband. I'm not going to pretend loving you doesn't scare me too, but I already lost one version of my life to a boat on bad water. I'm not going to lose a second one to a man who's too afraid to come inside." I put down the part I was cleaning. I looked at her, really looked, the way I still hadn't quite let myself since the day with the umbrella, because looking meant admitting how much I'd already let her matter. "I don't know how to do this without being terrified something happens to you too," I told her. It was the most honest sentence I'd said out loud since the Coast Guard called the boatyard 2.5 years earlier. "I know," she said. "I'm terrified too. I just decided the terror's worth it." I'm still deciding that, every day. That's what this actually is, Marcus. It's not that the fear goes away. It's that you decide it's not going to be the one driving. I moved in with her 3 weeks after that conversation. Not because the fear disappeared, but because she was right that waiting for it to disappear meant waiting forever, and I was tired of living a life measured out in things I was too scared to have. My parents met her that Christmas. My mother cried when Iris showed her a drawing she'd made, a small illustration, unprompted, of Danny standing on the dock the way she'd seen him in old photographs, the boatyard behind him. Sun on the water. She'd never met him. She'd only heard me describe him in pieces, over months, on ferry rides and kitchen counters, and the long, quiet drives back from her studio. She'd built him out of what I gave her, and somehow she got him exactly right. "He looks happy," my mother said, and that was the first time I'd heard her say Danny's name without her voice breaking in 2 years. I keep that drawing in the boatyard office now, above the workbench, where I see it every morning before the 4:15. Some days I still stand there a minute too long, coffee going cold in my hand, and I let myself miss him the whole, unguarded way instead of the careful, managed way I'd trained myself into. Iris asks me sometimes if I think Danny would have liked her. I always tell her the truth. He would have teased her mercilessly about the humming, and then he would have told me privately, when it was just the two of us on the dock the way brothers talk, that I'd finally done something right. I don't know if there's a lesson in any of this, the kind you're supposed to land a story on. If there is, I think it's smaller than people expect. It isn't that grief ends, or that love fixes it, or that a stranger on a ferry can undo what the water took from either of us. It's just that some people are willing to stand in the rain with you long enough that eventually you remember what it felt like to come in out of it. And if you're lucky, genuinely, unreasonably lucky, you find one of them on a Thursday, holding an umbrella that isn't even yours, and you have the sense not to walk away.